"To finally being free," he said at my wife's funeral, raising her favorite crystal glass, the same one she only used on Christmas. Laughter, a few coughs, but he wasn't done. Daniel grinned and added, "Big changes by Monday. My own son." While her body hadn't even cooled. That wasn't grief, it was conquest. Then I saw it. Her office door half shut, the red-tabbed ledger she guarded like gospel still on her desk. 30 years of quiet preparation, just waiting for this moment. My hands shook. Not from age, but from knowing something Daniel didn't. Margaret's not done protecting this family. Not by a long shot. And in exactly 30 days, he's going to find out why. My name is Harold Whitman, and I'm 75 years old. Most mornings now I stand at my garage workbench breathing in cedar dust while my woodworking tools wait patiently beside me. My late wife Margaret and I built Whitman. Hardware from nothing but determination and trust over 50 years together. Our son Daniel, once our pride, grew colder as the business flourished, treating our loyal employees like disposable assets and using our family name to secure questionable loans. Margaret, always the careful one, kept detailed records of everything and entrusted them to our attorney Lewis Harding with specific instructions for later. The fresh sawdust can't mask my unease as I hear the church bells fade from her funeral. My hands, still steady after all these years, grip my chisel a bit tighter. But let me start from the beginning. The funeral home's reception hall felt too warm, too crowded. Everyone who'd ever bought so much as a box of nails from Whitman Hardware seemed to have shown up to pay their respects. The air was thick with whispered condolences and the cloying smell of grocery store flour. Arrangements. You know that hollow feeling when something precious slips through your fingers. That's how I felt watching our son Daniel work the room like a politician at a fundraiser. His designer suit probably cost more than our first month's store inventory back in '68. If I could have everyone's attention, Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of conversation as he raised his crystal glass. The one Margaret always saved for Christmas dinner. I'd like to propose a toast. My chest tightened. Something in his tone, that familiar smugness he'd developed in recent years, made my hand shake as I lifted my own glass. "To Mother," he began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "and to finally being free." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests coughed politely. Others suddenly found their shoes fascinating. I caught Lewis Harding, our family attorney, watching. Daniel with a jaw so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Free. The word echoed in my head like a cash drawer slamming shut. Free from what? Margaret had given that boy everything. Private schools, connections, his first management position at the store. Hell, she'd even covered for his accounting errors back in '92. I needed air. Moving to the hallway, I steadied myself against the wall where Margaret had insisted we hang our proudest moments. There she was in the first photo, ribbon in hand at our grand opening. God, she was beautiful that day, nervous but determined. Next to it, Daniel at 18, cutting the ribbon for our second location. His smile was genuine then, before success started twisting him. "Harry?" Frank Marino's weathered hand landed on my shoulder. My oldest friend, fellow Navy man, he could always read my moods. "You holding up?" "Frank, I need a favor." My voice sounded older than I felt. "The will reading. I want to schedule it for tomorrow. No point letting rumors grow legs. Could you come early? Say 9? You got it, buddy." Frank's grip tightened briefly. Margaret always said timing was everything. From the kitchen, Daniel's laugh carried over the quiet conversations. "Big changes by Monday. The old ways aren't cutting it anymore." The storm in my gut grew from whisper to gale. I excused myself to Margaret's home office, where her old ledger still sat in its place of honor. My fingers traced the worn leather cover, remembering how she'd spend hours here after closing, recording every detail with scientific precision. "What did you see coming, Margaret?" I whispered to the empty room. "What kind of freedom is our son really after?" I opened the ledger, the familiar scent of leather and paper hitting me like a physical force. Margaret's neat handwriting filled every line, each entry precise as a railway schedule. Looking at those careful columns of numbers and notes, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in these pages lay answers I wasn't seeing yet. Through the door I could still hear Daniel holding court, his voice carrying that new edge of authority that had started creeping in these past few years. What kind of freedom could he possibly want that Margaret hadn't already given him? The morning after the funeral dawned crisp and clear. Main Street hadn't changed much since Margaret and I opened our first store. Same brick facades, same uneven sidewalks that caught snowmelt in spring. Frank met me outside Peterson's coffee shop, thermos in hand, smelling like his trademark camp brew that could wake the dead. "You're looking better than yesterday," he said, falling into step beside me. The familiar click of his cane on concrete brought back memories of shore leave in '68. Looking better than I feel. I watched a delivery truck rumble past Whitman Hardware's front windows. Did I ever tell you about the time Margaret caught the supplier padding invoices? She could spot a decimal point out of place at 50 paces. Frank took a long sip from his thermos. "Harry, I've known you since boot camp. You don't make small talk unless something's eating at you." That's what I've always loved about Frank. No need to dance around things. Daniel's toast yesterday, the way he said free, like he's been waiting to say it. Arrogance like that? Frank's voice dropped lower. Usually means the paperwork's already in motion. Man doesn't swagger unless he thinks he's holding aces. My stomach clenched. Lewis, our attorney, he set the will reading for Friday morning. Asked us both to come early. Smart man, Lewis. Frank stopped walking, turned to face me. Margaret always said he was the careful type. What time? 9 sharp, but he wants us there by 8:30. We'd reached the store by then. Through the plate glass windows, I could see Daniel holding court in what used to be my office. He'd moved in there weeks ago, while Margaret was still in hospice. 4 young guys in suits I didn't recognize clustered around him like eager puppies. Complete inventory overhaul. Daniel's voice carried through the propped-open door. Digital pivots already planned. Old-school retail's dead. We're talking e-commerce, automated ordering. Frank's hand tightened on his cane. Sounds like he's planning more than just new shelving. My phone buzzed. A text from Lewis. Please bring Margaret's ledgers. Do not share. Something flickered in my chest. Not quite hope, but maybe its distant cousin. Margaret's ledgers. She'd kept them religiously, cross-referenced everything from payroll to pencil sales. Mrs. Chen from the alterations shop hurried past, eyes down. Usually she'd stop to chat about her grandkids, but today, nothing. Word travels fast in small towns, and something was definitely traveling. I should head home, I said. Got some homework before Friday. Frank nodded. Want company? Not yet, but keep your phone on. Always do, sailor, always do. Back home, I spread Margaret's ledgers across the dining room table. 30 years of business history in neat columns and precise notations. Her handwriting never changed. Same careful loops, same ruler-straight lines. I could almost smell her perfume, subtle as morning dew, as I turned the pages. A red tab caught my eye. Contingencies. Margaret's neat script filled page after page. Dates, amounts, notes I didn't quite understand. My hands shook a little as I grabbed the kitchen calendar and circled Friday's date, then circled it again. Daniel had said, free. Margaret had written, contingencies. 2 words, 30 years apart, suddenly feeling very connected. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Lewis. Found what we need. Friday will be interesting. I closed the ledger, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. What had Margaret seen coming? What had she prepared for that had Daniel so eager to declare his freedom? The grandfather clock in the hall, Margaret's favorite wedding present, chimed 10. 2 days until the will reading. 2 days to understand what contingency my wife had planned for, that our son seemed so desperate to outrun. Friday hit like a gavel, sharp and final. I smoothed my tie, the blue one Margaret gave me last Christmas, and followed Frank through Lewis's oak-paneled door. The conference room smelled exactly like it had during our first meeting 30 years ago. Leather-bound law books and that lemon oil, Margaret always said, reminded her of church pews. Coffee, gentlemen? Lewis's assistant balanced a tray of china cups. Real china, mind you, not those paper things you get at diners. Black for me, Frank said, settling into one of those high-backed leather chairs. That whisper money. Harry here takes his with cream, 2 sugars. Amazing how something as simple as someone remembering how you take your coffee can steady your nerves. I wrapped my fingers around the warm cup, thinking about all the morning coffees Margaret and I had shared at our kitchen counter, planning the day's deliveries, or discussing which employee's kid needed college recommendation letters. Daniel's running late, Lewis announced, checking his watch. His bow tie was perfectly centered, as always. We'll give him 5 minutes. Frank leaned close. You holding up? Like a rusty nail, I muttered. Still works, but feeling the strain. The wall clock ticked past 9:05, each click echoing off the walnut paneling. Just when Lewis reached for his phone, the door swung open. Daniel swept in like he owned the place, which for all I knew he might soon. His suit probably cost more than our first month's store inventory back in '72. He barely glanced my way, thumbs dancing across his phone screen. "Sorry, everyone," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Conference call ran long. "Shall we begin?" Lewis cleared his throat, arranged his papers with precise movements. "We're here for the reading of Margaret Whitman's last will and testament." He lifted a document, cream-colored paper, with that official look. Mrs. Whitman made her final revisions 3 months ago. My coffee turned bitter on my tongue. 3 months ago, right after her diagnosis. "The primary clause concerning Whitman Hardware Company," Lewis continued, voice steady as a plumb line, "bequeaths controlling shares 60% to Daniel James Whitman, effective immediately upon reading." The floor seemed to tilt under my chair. Beside me, Frank went still as a statue. Daniel's smile spread across his face like neon lighting up at dusk. He set his phone down, finally giving the room his full attention. "Well then," he said, "I believe that settles—" "There is," Lewis cut in, reaching for a sealed envelope. "An addendum." Daniel's smile flickered. "What addendum?" "Per Mrs. Whitman's explicit instructions, this document is to remain sealed for precisely 30 days from today." Lewis tapped his calendar. "It will be opened on March 15th in the presence of all shareholders." "That's ridiculous," Daniel snapped. "I'm majority shareholder now. I can—" "The addendum's timing is non-negotiable," Lewis said. "It was filed with the court last week. Any attempt to circumvent or accelerate the process will trigger automatic legal review." I watched Daniel's face. Something flashed behind his eyes. Was it fear? No, more like calculation. His jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on numbers that wouldn't add up. 30 days, Frank whispered so low only I could hear. "There's your timer, Harry." The wall clock kept marking seconds, each tick sounding like cash dropping into a till or maybe draining out of one. Daniel stood abruptly, smoothing his jacket. "Fine, 30 days. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." He grabbed his phone and strode out, leaving the door swinging. Lewis gathered his papers, movements precise as a surgeon. "Harry, Frank, a moment!" But I barely heard him. My mind was spinning like an old cash register. Margaret had always played the long game. In business, in marriage, in life. She wouldn't have handed over control without a safety net. But why delay? Why 30 days? I stared at that sealed envelope on Lewis's desk. What truth could be so important it needed a month-long fuse? "Harry?" Frank's hand settled on my shoulder. "You with us?" "Yeah," I said, watching the minute hand tick forward. "But I think Margaret's still running this show." I pulled into the store parking lot just after 6, same as I had most nights since '72. The sunset painted the old brick front in shades of amber, just like when Margaret and I first hung that Whitman Hardware sign. Back then, we'd close up together, count the day's take, and treat ourselves to pie at the diner if we'd broken even. My key card wouldn't work. I stood there like a fool, swiping again and again at the reader. The little light kept blinking red, mocking me. Through the glass, I could see the memo lying face up on the counter near the register, stark white against the dark wood. "Need some help there, Harry?" Mike, our night security guard, came around the corner. Good kid. His father had worked for us back in the '80s. "Systems. Acting up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh yeah, Mr. Daniel had IT do some updates today. Said to tell you he'd email your new credentials." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "Want me to let you in?" My throat tightened. "Please." The bell chimed as we entered. Same sound for 50 years, like an old friend's greeting. Mike disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with that memo. "Notice of procedural update," it read. "Effective. Immediately all financial approvals and purchasing authority route through Daniel Whitman, CEO." My signature line was crossed out with precise black ink. My hands shook as I dialed the bank. The recording felt endless before a human voice came on. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman, but your signature authorization was updated this afternoon. The majority owner submitted the proper forms. Would you like me to email you the notification?" I hung up. 50 years of trust, reduced to a form letter. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked the aisles, touching familiar items like old friends at a funeral. This socket set, I'd shown Daniel how to use one just like it when he was 10. These tape measures, Margaret had organized them by color last spring, saying customers shop with their eyes first. The back door chimed. Frank's solid footsteps approached. "Figured I'd find you here," he said, studying my face. "Daniel's been busy. Started before the ink was dry." I handed him the memo. "Bank accounts, security access." "Document everything," Frank said, steady as a level. "Every memo, every changed password, every update. Margaret kept records, now it's your turn." I nodded, pulling out my phone. Started photographing the memo, the notices taped to the office door, the new login screens on the computer. My email pinged. From Daniel, subject line, transition plan. The message was pure corporate speak, retirement optics and brand modernization and digital-first customer experience. Every paragraph felt like another brick in a wall between me and my life's work. I printed it, hands steady now with purpose, pulled Margaret's old ledger from my briefcase, the one with that tab marked Contingencies, slipped the email inside, right behind her neat columns of numbers and notes. The register drawer snapped shut, Mike closing out for the night. The sound echoed through the empty store like a judge's gavel. "Time to go, Harry," Frank said gently. I looked around at the shelves Margaret had organized, the counter where we'd taught Daniel his multiplication tables, the wall of pictures showing 50 years of community service awards. "You know what gets me, Frank." My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "He thinks dignity has a price tag. Then let's prove him wrong," Frank replied, holding the door. "One day at a time, 30 of them to be exact." The bell chimed one last time as we left. In my pocket, Margaret's ledger felt heavier than usual, like it was weighted with more than just paper and ink. Morning hit like a spotlight, too bright and too direct. I'd barely slept, spending half the night sorting through Margaret's files. Years of vendor contracts, employee records, community sponsorships, all the paperwork that proves a life's work. Now I was heading to the bank, where I'd been signing checks since Nixon was president. The marble lobby of First State hadn't changed in 30 years. Same potted plants, same worn carpet runner, same local artists' paintings on loan. Susan Blake, who'd been our main teller since she was fresh out of high school, suddenly found her computer screen fascinating as I approached. "Morning, Susan." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Oh, Mr. Whitman." She glanced toward the manager's office. Mr. Peters asked to see you if you came in." Carl Peters was waiting in his doorway, all polished shoes and rehearsed sympathy. "Harry, please come in. Coffee?" "Rather just hear it straight, Carl." He settled behind his desk, straightening his tie. "Standard procedure when majority ownership changes. The new payment authorizations came through yesterday afternoon. Vendor payments have been rerouted through the main corporate account." He slid a paper across his desk. "And here's the notification about the new corporate card issued to Daniel." My hands stayed flat on my knees. 50 years of business, Carl. You cashed my first payroll checks when this was still your father's bank. I understand, Harry, but regulations are regulations." He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Daniel submitted all the proper documentation." The sun through his window felt like an interrogation lamp. I stood, legs steady by force of will. "Thank you for your time." Outside, I pulled out my phone and called Frank. 29 days, he said before I could speak. "That's what we've got, Harry. Keep your powder dry." I walked past Lang's Bakery, where Margaret used to buy birthday cakes for every employee. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Lang herself look away quickly, bending to rearrange cookies that were already perfectly aligned. "Lost the reins," I heard someone whisper. The words hit like gravel in my gut. Back home, I sat at Margaret's old writing desk. The wood still smelled faintly of her hand lotion. I drafted a letter to Lewis Harding, keeping my tone professionally calm. "Dear Lewis, given recent operational changes at Whitman Hardware, I formally request preservation of all financial and administrative records pending the scheduled reading of Margaret's addendum. Please confirm receipt and advise on any additional documentation required." I copied Frank, printed it for the ledger, then started a new list. Timeline of exclusion. Item by item, I documented each changed password, every cancelled meeting, all the scrubbed calendar invites. My phone buzzed with notifications of vendor list updates, Apparently, I no longer had permission to even view our suppliers. The grandfather clock Margaret loved chimed noon. I went to my workshop, where sawdust and routine usually brought peace. Above the workbench hung the family photos I'd taken down from the store office before Daniel could modernize them away. I set an alarm on my phone. Addendum 29. Pinned it right, next to Margaret's picture, her smile steady and knowing. "What else did you see coming?" I asked her photograph. The silence held no answers, just the weight of 29 more days. Frank's text buzzed. "Keeping track? Every detail," I replied. "Meeting notes, system lockouts, vendor changes, even photographed the bank notification. Good man. Evidence matters." I picked up a piece of oak I'd been saving for a special project. Margaret had always loved the grain pattern, said it looked like waves on a calm sea. My hands knew what to do, even if my heart felt lost at high tide. The day crawled past in a blur of documentation. Every hour brought some new system update or procedural adjustment, corporate speak for erasing my fingerprints from my own life's work. By sunset, my timeline of exclusion ran 3 pages long. A week into what folks might call my retirement, though, that wasn't any kind of word I'd chosen. I pulled into my driveway just as the mail truck was leaving. There on my front step sat a crisp white overnight envelope from First State Bank. You know that feeling when your chest gets tight before you even touch the paper? Yeah, it was one of those. Final notice, legacy signer removed. The words were printed in that cold computer font that makes everything sound like it's been decided by machines instead of people. My hands shook a little, and I had to sit down right there on the porch steps. Margaret used to squeeze my shoulder whenever paperwork came that bruised my pride. She had this way of making even the hardest business decisions feel manageable. "Numbers don't lie, Harry," she'd say, "but they don't tell the whole story either." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my yard as I finally made my way inside. The study felt too quiet, with just half the curtains drawn the way Margaret always kept them. Enough light to work, enough shade to think, as she put it. The leather chair behind her desk took my weight with a familiar creak. I picked up her ledger, fingers tracing the worn edges where she'd tracked 30 years of inventory, payroll and vendor contracts. The brass clasps felt cold. For a moment, just one moment, I nearly closed it for good. What was the point of fighting when every hour brought another piece of paper saying I didn't matter anymore? A soft knock at the door pulled me back. Frank stood there, same steady presence he'd been since our Navy days. He didn't ask if I wanted company. He just walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from his thermos. "Margaret never did anything without a reason," he said, setting my cup down. The rich aroma filled the room, cutting through the musty paper smell. "And she sure as hell never did anything without a backup plan." I took a sip, letting the warmth settle my nerves. "She kept this ledger like it was scripture, Frank, every night, checking numbers, making notes." "Then maybe you ought to be reading it like scripture right now." He was right, of course. I opened the ledger again, really looking this time. The tabs along the edge were color-coded, blue for vendor audits, yellow for inventory reconciliation, red for what she called irregularities. Her neat handwriting filled the margins with dates, initials, and brief notes that probably meant something important. "She was building a case," Frank said quietly. "Question is, against what?" I pulled out an index card from my desk drawer, the fancy ones Margaret ordered special because she said good paper makes good thoughts stick better. With careful letters, I wrote, "Hold, the line 30 days." Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out something heavy, a brass paperweight shaped like an anchor. "Got this back in 72, remember? Captain gave them to the whole crew when we made it through that storm off Guam. You kept this all these years?" He set it down on top of my index card. "Thought maybe you could use some ballast." The brass caught the late afternoon light, throwing warm reflections across Margaret's ledger. I touched the anchor's worn edges, remembering how many times it had held Frank's own papers down through decades of friendship. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to that bank notice, sitting there like a judge's verdict. But the anchor held it down, kept it from blowing away in the wind of change that was trying to sweep through my life. Frank stood, stretching his back. "Same time. Tomorrow?" I nodded, grateful he didn't make me ask. "Bring more coffee." "Always do." He paused at the door. "You know what Margaret would say right now?" Numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the whole story. We finished together. After he left, I sat there watching shadows lengthen across the study floor. The anchor gleamed steady on my note card, holding down more than just paper. If that anchor slipped, what else would the tide take? 2 weeks into what felt like the longest countdown of my life, I was organizing receipts in the garage when my phone buzzed. Lewis Harding's voicemail was brief. "Please call. Important." My hands shook a little as I dialed back. Funny how 4 simple words could make your heart race like that. "Harold," Lewis said, his voice careful and measured, "I need to share something critical about Margaret's addendum. Are you somewhere private?" I closed the garage door, the metal track groaning like it needed oil. "I am now." Margaret left detailed documentation. He paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. "It appears Daniel has been embezzling from the company. Systematic withdrawals disguised as consulting fees." The phone nearly slipped from my grip. I steadied myself against my workbench, the familiar smell of cedar dust suddenly sharp in my nose. "Say that again, Lewis." "Your wife kept meticulous records. She tracked unusual payments dating back 18 months. Each withdrawal was logged as external consulting services. But the money went to shell companies Daniel created." The room tilted slightly. I'd taught that boy to count change at our first register, showed him how to balance the books every Sunday night. Now here I was, learning he'd been stealing from his own family's legacy. "Are you absolutely certain?" My voice sounded distant even to myself. "The evidence is ironclad, Harold. Margaret cross-referenced everything, bank statements, wire transfers, incorporation documents. She even hired a forensic accountant last spring to verify her findings. It's all here, sealed with the addendum." The garage seemed too small suddenly. Through the window I could see the maple tree Margaret and I planted when Daniel was born. Its leaves were starting to turn gold, just like they did the autumn we opened the store. "Who else knows about this?" I asked. "Only myself and the accountant, who's bound by confidentiality." Margaret was thorough in her preparations. Of course she was. Even in death she was protecting all of us. The business, our employees, even Daniel from his own worst impulses. I remembered how she'd stay late some nights, poring over those ledgers. "Just keeping us honest," she'd say with that quiet smile. "What do you need from me?" I asked Lewis. "Absolute silence until the addendum is opened. Any hint of this could compromise the legal process Margaret put in motion." "Understood." I glanced at my workbench calendar. 16 days left. After hanging up, I sat on my old shop stool, letting the truth settle into my bones. The betrayal wasn't just about pushing me aside anymore. It was about years of calculated theft. My own son had been picking apart the business like a vulture, probably thinking he'd cover his tracks once he had control. I called Frank, keeping it brief. "We hold. We prepare." He'd know what I meant. 50 years of friendship meant sometimes you didn't need many words. That evening I spread everything across my dining room table, every email, memo, and bank notice since Margaret's funeral. Each piece of paper was another breadcrumb she'd left, leading to today's revelation. I created a timeline, noting how Daniel's modernization plans aligned perfectly with covering his tracks. The more I documented, the clearer Margaret's strategy became. She'd given Daniel just enough rope to reveal his true character, while making sure justice waited in the wings. My wife, the chess master. Even now she was 3 moves ahead. I filed each paper chronologically, cross-referencing them with the tabs in Margaret's ledger. Red for irregularities. Now I understood why she'd chosen that color. Yellow for inventory reconciliation, probably hiding more evidence of Daniel's creative accounting. For the first time since the funeral, exhaustion hit me like a physical weight. I set my alarm. Addendum 16. And actually felt ready for sleep. As I turned out the lights, my eyes caught the framed photo of Daniel's graduation from business school. He was smiling, one arm around each of us, his new MBA gleaming with possibility. If truth was locked and loaded in that addendum, how violently would Daniel scramble when the trap finally sprang? I pulled into the store parking lot just as the sun was breaking over Main Street. The morning air had that crisp September bite that always reminded me of opening day nerves 50 years ago. Margaret had arranged every display twice before we unlocked the doors, wanting everything perfect for our first customers. The memory vanished when I saw the fresh memo taped to my office door. Well, what used to be my office. Bold letters announced, Organizational update, founder emeritus role, advisory only. Below that was a bulleted list of revised responsibilities that basically amounted to staying out of the way. You know that feeling when someone's trying to erase you piece by piece? That's what this was. Daniel was moving faster now, like a man who knew his time was running short. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the memo, then carefully peeled it off to preserve the tape marks. Another piece of evidence for Lewis. The morning light caught the brass nameplate on the door, Harold Whitman, founder, which I noticed had already been unscrewed on one side, hanging crooked like a loose tooth. Mr. Whitman? Jamie Ortiz, our longest-serving clerk, was standing there with a coffee in her hand. She'd started as summer help 15 years ago, and Margaret had taken her under her wing, teaching her everything about the business. I made an extra. 2 sugars like always. Thanks, Jamie. I took the cup, noticing how her eyes darted to the memo in my other hand. She squeezed my arm gently. 30 days, she whispered, then headed back to the register. It hit me then. The staff weren't avoiding taking sides. They were waiting, just like me. I spent the morning documenting everything, every changed password, every revised procedure, every modernization initiative that felt more like erosion. I photographed it all, creating a digital trail that backed up Margaret's paper one. Each file went straight to Lewis with timestamps and notes. Around noon, I drafted a letter to our vendors. Nothing dramatic, just a calm note confirming that operations were continuing as normal and requesting detailed statements through month's end. Professional, measured, the kind of letter Margaret would have approved of. Big changes coming to vendor relationships, Daniel announced, breezing past my desk without looking at me. Streamlining the whole supply chain. I kept typing, pretending I hadn't heard him. He was trying to bait me, hoping I'd give him an excuse, but Margaret's voice echoed in my head. Patience outweighs pride, Harry. After closing, I retreated to my garage workshop. There was an old oak plank propped in the corner. Margaret had saved it, saying the grain was too beautiful to waste. I ran my hands over the rough surface, feeling the history in every groove and knot. The rhythmic motion of sanding helped steady my thoughts. Back and forth, following the grain, letting the wood tell me which way to move. The sawdust filled my nose with that sweet, familiar scent that always meant home. I remembered teaching Daniel to sand when he was 10. Let the wood guide you, son, I'd said. Don't force it. He'd been so eager to learn back then, before ambition hardened him into someone who thought guidance meant weakness. Setting my alarm to Addendum 10, I hung tomorrow's suit on the garage door. The same suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral. Seemed fitting it should witness whatever happened when that envelope finally opened. Jamie caught me as I was leaving. We're all behind you, Mr. Whitman, she said softly. Mrs. Whitman taught us what matters here. I nodded, throat tight. Margaret had built more than just a business. She'd built a family, one that remembered its roots even when branches went bad. Upstairs, I laid out my tie and polished my shoes for the shareholder. Meeting. 10 days. After 50 years of building something honest, 10 days stood between truth and erasure. When that envelope opens in that room, who walks out diminished? 30 days. The numbers on my watch seemed to pulse as I walked into Lewis's conference room at exactly 9 a.m. The hallway still smelled of lemon oil and old books, but today it felt different, like a courtroom more than a law office. Ruth Kaplan was already there, her silver hair caught in the morning light. She'd been one of our first investors, back when Margaret and I were just starting out. Next to her sat Tom Reese, who'd handled our vendor contracts for 20 years. 2 junior associates I didn't recognize had legal pads ready, pens hovering like tiny weapons. Frank gave my shoulder a quick squeeze before taking his seat. Steady as she goes, Harry. I settled into my chair, forcing my hands to rest, easy on the armrests. Margaret's ledger sat in front of me, tabbed and annotated just the way she'd left it. The morning light caught the brass corners she'd added to protect the cover, always thinking ahead, my Margaret. At 9:15 sharp, Daniel swept in like he owned the building. His tie was runway perfect, his smile calibrated for a victory lap. He barely glanced at me as he took his seat, already thumbing through his phone. Everyone signed in. Lewis adjusted his glasses, professional as ever. When we all nodded, he reached for the envelope centered on the polished table. I couldn't help staring at it. The paper was thick, cream-colored legal stock. Margaret's initials pressed into red wax looked as crisp as the day she'd sealed them. How many nights had she sat up late, preparing this moment? "Before we proceed," Lewis said, "I'd like to confirm all required parties are present." He checked his list. Ruth Kaplan representing original shareholders, Tom Rees for vendor oversight, Harold Whitman, founder, Daniel Whitman, current majority shareholder, 2 witnesses from the firm. Excellent. Daniel's phone disappeared into his pocket. "Let's get this formality wrapped up, shall we? I have a board meeting at 11. The wax crackled as Lewis broke the seal. I heard paper sliding against paper, then a soft intake of breath as he reviewed the contents. "This addendum," Lewis began, his voice steady, "was prepared by Margaret Whitman on April 15th of last year. It contains 3 sections, documented financial discrepancies, supporting bank statements, and a modification to the company charter." Daniel's perfect smile flickered for just a moment. Section 1 details systematic fund transfers from company accounts to private holdings under the label consulting fees. These transfers, totaling $812,000, were executed without board approval or proper documentation. Ruth Kaplan's pen scratched across her notepad. The sound felt like scissors cutting through Daniel's confidence. Section 2 provides full bank records cross-referenced with Mrs. Whitman's personal ledgers, demonstrating that these transfers were neither authorized nor legitimate business. Expenses. I watched my son's face. The smile was gone now, replaced by something between disbelief and fury. Section 3, Lewis continued, references a charter modification dated March 1st of last year, approved by the full board. He lifted a separate document. The modification states that any heir or officer found to have committed financial fraud against the company automatically forfeits all shares, positions, and claims to authority effective immediately upon verification of evidence. A gasp, I think it was Tom Rees, echoed off the walnut panels. Daniel's chair scraped back as he stood. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't possibly—" "The evidence," Lewis cut in, "has been independently verified by forensic accountants. Their findings are included in Appendix C." Papers rustled as copies were distributed. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the moment reality hit. His perfect tie suddenly seemed to strangle him. The confidence drained from his posture like water from a broken vessel. "If you'll turn to page 4, Lewis said, "you'll find the transfer dates and amounts clearly listed." Mrs. Whitman was quite thorough in her documentation. Daniel's eyes met mine for the first time that morning. The look in them wasn't anger or shame. It was something worse. Empty. Like he'd just realized. He'd gambled everything on a rigged game, only to discover his mother had been counting cards all along. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the weight of Margaret's foresight settle around us all like a judge's robes. Which falls first, title or reputation? That afternoon I watched Lewis work through his checklist with surgical precision. Each document landed on the conference table like another nail in Daniel's professional coffin. The leather. Chairs had emptied except for the 3 of us, Lewis, Daniel, and me. The silence felt thick enough to cut. "These require immediate signature," Lewis said, sliding the first stack toward Daniel. "Removal from executive position. Effective immediately." Daniel's hand shook as he reached for his Mont Blanc pen, the one I'd given him when he made VP. "This is temporary," he muttered. "We can negotiate." "The charter is explicit." Lewis's voice was gentle but firm. "Fraud triggers automatic forfeiture. There's no provision for negotiation." I remembered countless evenings watching Margaret balance the books, her reading glasses perched just so, making sure every penny aligned. The cedar scent from her pencil shavings would mix with her lavender hand cream, the small details that built a lifetime of trust. "Dad," Daniel turned to me, his face flushed. "You can't let this happen. We can work something out." My chest ached, but I kept my voice steady. "The documents speak for themselves, son." 30 days for full repayment, Lewis continued, presenting the next form. "After that, the bank may pursue additional remedies." Daniel's pen scratched across the paper, his signature growing more jagged with each page. "I need more time. The investments are tied up." "The timeline is fixed," Lewis said. "Your mother's documentation is quite thorough." I signed where indicated, accepting temporary stewardship until the board could arrange proper succession. Each stroke of the pen felt heavy with both victory and loss. Frank had been right. Margaret had planned for the storm. When we finally stood, Daniel wouldn't look at me. He gathered his phone and keys, straightened his tie one last time, and walked out without a word. The door clicked shut behind him with the finality of a judge's gavel. Outside, the afternoon sun hit me like a spotlight. A woman with a press badge stepped forward, Gina Patel from the local paper. She'd covered the store's 50th anniversary last year. "Mr. Whitman, can you comment on today's developments?" I thought of Margaret's quiet strength, her belief that actions spoke louder than words. "The documents speak," I said, and kept walking. My phone buzzed before I reached the car. The bank's fraud department wanted to verify the freeze on Daniel's corporate accounts and credit lines. I confirmed while sitting in the parking lot, watching clouds drift over Main Street, where we'd first hung the Whitman hardware sign. The weight of it all finally hit me. Relief, yes, the store was safe, Margaret's legacy protected, but underneath lay the grinding sorrow of a father who'd wanted so much more for his son. I'd dreamed of Daniel taking the reins, with honor, building on what we'd created. Instead, he'd tried to steal it piece by piece, like a thief in his own home. I called Frank. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said. "Clean?" Lewis handled it perfectly. Margaret's documentation was ironclad. And Daniel. I watched a young family walk past the store window, the little boy pointing at our model train display. He signed everything, but Frank... "Yeah? Phase 2 will arrive in print." I could already picture tomorrow's headline. The local paper loved nothing more than a fall from grace. "You want me to come over?" Frank asked. "I've still got that bottle of Maker's Mark Margaret gave me last Christmas." "Not tonight." I needed the quiet, needed to sit with both the victory and the cost. But thanks, old friend. The sun was setting when I pulled into my driveway. Down the street, I could see lights on in Daniel's home office. Was he already calling lawyers searching for loopholes, or was he finally facing the truth Margaret had seen coming? When tomorrow's headline lands, I wondered, how far does the fall echo? The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window as I unfolded the Cedar County Ledger. There it was, spread across the front page in bold print. Whitman hardware air removed amid fraud revelations. The photo showed Daniel leaving Lewis's office yesterday, his face twisted in a way that made my coffee taste bitter. You know those moments when reality feels both heavy and weightless? That was this morning. 53 years of business reputation now hinged on how our community would process this news. The article laid out the facts with brutal efficiency: the embezzlement, Margaret's documentation, the charter's moral clause, and Daniel's immediate removal. My phone started, buzzing before I finished my toast. First was Thompson Supply, our oldest vendor, confirming they'd maintain our credit lines under my restored signature. Then Miller Tools, Burton Electric, and half a dozen others, all expressing relief that the store was back in steady hands. "Your mother would be proud," Frank said when he called. She knew exactly what she was doing with that 30-day timer. I remembered Margaret at her desk, meticulously, noting every transaction. "She gave Daniel enough rope to reveal himself," I said, then made sure the truth had teeth. The drive to the store felt different. Customers were already browsing the aisles when I arrived, some nodding as I passed. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop actually wiped her eyes before squeezing my arm. "We knew something wasn't right," she whispered, "but we trusted you'd fix it." I gathered the senior staff in the break room, the same space where Margaret used to host holiday potlucks. Jamie Ortiz stood near the coffee maker, her usually bright smile carrying a hint of worry. Ruth Kaplan sat with her notepad ready, every inch the shareholder who'd helped build this place. "First," I said, pulling out 2 sets of keys, "we need operational coverage while we stabilize." I handed them to Jamie and Ruth. "You two know this store's heartbeat better than anyone." Jamie's fingers closed around the keys like they were made of glass. "Mr. Whitman, are you sure?" "Margaret was sure," I said. "She believed in employee stewardship. It's time I scaled back and let the next generation lead." Ruth nodded, already making notes. "We'll need to reassure vendors about payment schedules." "Already happening," I said. "And I'm heading to Cedar County Bank after this to confirm Daniel's repayment terms are separate from store accounts." The meeting wrapped with quiet determination rather than celebration. This wasn't about winning. It was about rebuilding trust. I walked the aisles one last time as active owner, touching familiar shelves where Margaret and I had stocked inventory during lean years. Old Tom Weber tipped his cap as he picked up plumbing supplies. Sarah from the diner wiped her eyes while choosing paint samples. Frank met me at the bank, that brass anchor paperweight tucked under his arm. "Thought this belonged on the office desk now," he said, steady as she goes. Cedar County Bank's fraud department had already segregated Daniel's repayment obligations from store operations. The manager assured me our business accounts were clean and clear. "Mrs. Whitman's records made it simple to trace everything," she said. Walking back, I saw my reflection in the hardware store window. Older, yes, but standing straighter than I had in weeks. The model trains still circled their display track, just as they had when Daniel was small enough to press his nose against the glass in wonder. "You did right by her," Frank said quietly. "By the store, too." I watched a young father and son picking out their first toolbox together. "The family name might weather this better than the family line," I admitted. Frank set the anchor paperweight on the front counter. Margaret knew the difference between blood and legacy. She chose legacy. A sharp thought hit me. Can the family name stand straighter than the family line? That evening, I walked back to my garage workshop, where the oak plank Margaret had saved still waited on my bench. The wood had a story in it. She'd spotted it at an estate sale years ago, ran her fingers along the grain, and declared it meant for something special. Now I knew what that something was. You ever notice how working wood tells you what it wants to be? This piece had rocking chair written all over it, right there in those patient lines that flowed like river water. I traced them with my thumb, remembering how Margaret used to sit in her grandmother's rocker, keeping the books with that quiet determination of hers. The first cuts came easy, like the wood was helping me along. Each slice of the blade revealed more of the pattern Margaret must have seen that day. Frank stopped by with coffee and sandwiches, but I barely looked up. Some jobs demand your whole attention. "Daniel's accounts are frozen," he mentioned between my saw strokes. "Bank's not playing gentle." I nodded, measuring twice for the curved rockers. "The paper's running follow-ups too. 3 days straight now." "Complete defeat," Frank said quietly. "Charter stripped his control. Legally, and the truth stripped everything else." I blew sawdust from a joint. Public disgrace tends to stick harder than legal papers. The phone buzzed. Jamie at the store. "Just wanted you to know, Mr. Whitman, sales are steady. Customers keep saying they're glad you're back in charge." I thanked her, then returned to shaping the armrests, made them smooth and strong, just like Margaret's hands on the ledger pages. The wood grain rippled under my fingers like the pages of her books, precise, purposeful, preserving truth. Night settled in, but I kept working. Some people might call it obsession, but I'd call it conversation. Every pass of the sandpaper brought out more of the oak's character, like Margaret's quiet strength coming back through my hands. You know what's funny about working alone in a garage at night? Your mind gets clear. All the noise falls away, and you see things straight. Daniel lost everything because he chose wrong. Simple as that. The charter Margaret updated took his control, and the truth she documented took his name. Clean as a plumb line. The chair came together like it knew its job. I set it by the open garage door where the evening air carried that cedar smell I've always loved. The wood gleamed warm under my work light, every curve and joint speaking of patience rewarded. Frank came back one last time carrying that brass anchor paperweight. He set it on top of Margaret's closed ledger without a word. We both looked at the chair, then at the ledger, and knew some circles just complete themselves. I settled into the rocker, testing its balance. Perfect. The motion felt like Margaret's calm wisdom, that steady back and forth of doing right things in right time. A few gentle creaks spoke of solid joints and honest work. "You know," I said to the quiet garage, where 53 years of marriage still echoed, "betrayal's a funny thing." The chair rocked smooth and true. "It only destroys the one who chooses it." Stop.